The military compound in Ouagadougou sat like a scarred fortress on the eastern edge of the city, its red clay walls and razor wire telling stories of betrayals witnessed and survived. It was close enough to hear the call to prayer from the Grand Mosque, yet far enough to feel utterly isolated when night descended and the desert wind began its mournful howl through the streets. I had made this place my center of operations for 3 years. 3 long years of walking a tightrope between competing factions, tribal loyalties, foreign interests, and the constant, gnawing awareness that in Burkina Faso, like so many African nations, military command was always temporary. You held power until someone stronger, smarter, or more ruthless decided it was their turn. The compound housed approximately 200 soldiers at any given time. Some were loyalists, men who had followed me since the northern campaigns against the insurgents who came down from the desert like locusts. Others were political appointments, officers placed in my command by generals in the capital who wanted eyes on my operations. And then there were the quiet ones, the soldiers you could never quite read, the ones who smiled at morning formation but whose eyes held calculations you couldn't decipher. My office occupied the 2nd floor of the main building, a Spartan room with concrete walls that sweated in the heat, a steel desk that had survived 3 different regimes, and windows that looked out over the training yards where young men learned to become soldiers. I spent most of my waking hours in that room reviewing intelligence reports that told stories of insurgent movements and political maneuvering, managing supply lines that seemed to always run short of everything except corruption, mediating disputes between officers whose tribal affiliations ran deeper than their national loyalty, and trying to anticipate the next crisis before it arrived at my doorstep with guns drawn. The desk was always covered with papers, requisition forms, intelligence briefings, personnel files, letters from families asking about sons who had disappeared into the machinery of war. Sometimes I wondered if any of it mattered, if all these words on paper could actually prevent the violence that seemed to be Burkina Faso's only constant. But that night, as I sat reviewing convoy routes and supply manifests, none of those papers mattered at all, because that night, the violence was coming for me. The first signs of betrayal had started 3 weeks earlier, subtle as smoke, easy to dismiss if you weren't paying attention. But I had learned long ago that in this world, you paid attention to everything, or you didn't survive. It began with Lieutenant Ouedraogo. He was a competent officer, mid-30s, from the Mossi tribe like most of the senior command. We had served together for 2 years, shared meals in the officers' mess, discussed tactics and strategy over warm beer on hot nights. He was the kind of man you thought you could trust, which made him exactly the kind of man you couldn't. I first noticed the change during a routine briefing. He was distracted, kept glancing at his phone, something he never did during meetings. When I asked him a direct question about security protocols, he hesitated, just for a second, but long enough for me to notice. His answer was textbook perfect, but his eyes told a different story. After that, I started watching more carefully. Ouedraogo began having private conversations with other officers, conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. He started leaving the compound more frequently, citing family obligations, personal business. Nothing you could point to as evidence, just a pattern emerging from the fog of daily routine. Then there were the meetings. 3 weeks before the night they came for me, I learned that several senior officers had been gathering at a tea house in the old quarter of the city. These weren't official meetings. No paperwork, no record, just men drinking tea and talking in low voices about the future of Burkina Faso, about leadership, about change. My intelligence network wasn't extensive, but it was loyal. Sergeant Diabate, a man who had saved my life during an ambush 2 years prior, came to me with the information. He was nervous, sweating despite the evening cool. "Captain," he said quietly, standing at attention in my office after I'd dismissed everyone else. "There are things you should know. Things being said." "Tell me," I said, leaning back in my chair, keeping my voice calm even as my heart rate increased. "Some of the officers, they meet outside the compound. They talk about changes, about how the country needs new leadership, stronger leadership. They mention your name, Captain. Not with respect. I didn't react visibly. That was rule 1. Never let them see you're worried. How many officers? At least 15, maybe 20. Ouedraogo leads the discussions. Major Sankara attends. Captain Zungrana, others, 20 officers. Nearly a quarter of my command structure. The number hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral. Are they planning something specific? Diabate shook his head. Nothing I've heard. But the way they talk, Captain, it's coming. Soon. After he left, I sat alone in my office for hours, staring at the map on my wall. 20 officers. Men I had trained with, fought beside, promoted. Men whose families I knew, whose ambitions I had supported. And now they were plotting against me. The question wasn't why, I understood why. In Burkina Faso, power was the only security. If you thought someone above you was weak, vulnerable, out of favor with the capital, you moved against them before they dragged you down with them. It was brutal, but it was survival. The real question was, what was I going to do about it? Over the next 2 weeks, I watched. I waited. I said nothing about what I knew, but I adjusted my behavior in subtle ways that only a trained observer would notice. I started varying my routine, leaving the office at different times, taking different routes through the compound, sleeping in different quarters. I identified which soldiers I could trust absolutely, and I made sure they understood, without explicit orders, that something was coming. In the military, there's a language beyond words. A look, a gesture, the way you position yourself in a room. These things communicate volumes to men trained to read tactical situations. I use that language now, signaling to my loyalists that we needed to be ready. I also started gathering intelligence more aggressively. I had Diabate and 2 other trusted NCOs quietly monitor the movements of the officers I suspected. Where they went, who they met with, when they made phone calls. It was paranoid behavior, the kind of thing that could destroy unit cohesion if discovered. But I was past the point of caring about cohesion. I was focused on survival. What I learned was disturbing. The conspiracy was wider than I'd thought, reaching into the civilian government, connecting with officers in other commands, even touching the presidential guard in the capital. This wasn't just a local coup attempt, it was coordinated, professional, and it had backing from people with serious resources. Major Sankara, one of my most senior officers, had met with a French military attaché 3 times in 2 weeks. France still pulled strings in Francophone Africa, and their interest in Burkina Faso's military leadership was always intense. Were they supporting the plot, giving it their blessing, or just watching to see who came out on top? Captain Zungrana had received a wire transfer of 5 million CFA francs, about $8,000, from an account in Côte d'Ivoire. Not a fortune, but enough to suggest someone was financing this operation. Mercenaries? Political parties? Foreign interests? The money trail went cold after that single transfer, professionally laundered through multiple accounts. And Lieutenant Ouedraogo, the man I'd once considered a friend, had been seen entering the home of General Traoré, the defense minister's chief of staff. That meeting lasted 4 hours. When Ouedraogo emerged, he was smiling. The picture became clear. I was being removed. Not because I'd done anything wrong, not because I was incompetent or disloyal to Burkina Faso, but because I was a piece on a chessboard that someone wanted to take off the board. My removal would create an opening for new leadership. Leadership that would owe debts to the people who had put them in power. It was classic African military politics. The kind of maneuvering that had toppled governments across the continent for decades. And I was about to become another casualty in that endless game. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. By the 3rd week, I knew the attack was imminent. The signs were everywhere if you knew how to read them. Officers making excuses to leave the compound. Equipment being moved without proper authorization. Whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. The atmosphere in the compound had changed, becoming tense, expectant, like the air before a thunderstorm. I made my own preparations quietly and carefully. I identified the 20 soldiers I trusted most. Men who had proven their loyalty through combat, men whose families I had protected, men who understood that in this world, trust was earned through blood and sacrifice. I brought them in one by one, late at night, speaking to each privately in my office. I didn't tell them everything I knew, but I told them enough. Something is coming, I would say. I need you to be ready. When I give the signal, I need you to move without hesitation, without question. Can I trust you? Every single one said yes. Some looked frightened. Others looked excited, eager for action. But all of them understood the gravity of what I was asking. I also made contingency plans. I identified alternative positions in the compound where I could direct operations if my office was compromised. I made sure my personal weapon was always loaded, always within reach. I arranged for a vehicle to be fueled and ready at all times. Keys hidden in a location only I knew about, and I waited. The call came on a Tuesday night. 3 weeks and 2 days after Sergeant Diabate first warned me about the meetings in the tea house. It was 11 p.m., and I was still in my office going through reports that no longer seemed to matter. The phone on my desk rang, not my official line, but the secure phone I used for sensitive communications. I picked it up. Yes, Captain. It was Corporal Sawadago, one of my intelligence assets who worked in the motor pool. His voice was tight with tension. They've moved. 20 men, maybe more. They're gathering equipment now. Vehicles are being prepared. It's happening tonight. My heart rate increased, but my voice remained calm. Who's leading them? Lieutenant Uedraogo, sir. Major Sankara is with him. Captain Zaungrana. Others I couldn't identify in the dark. Where are they now? Still in the motor pool, sir. But they're moving fast. I'd estimate less than 30 minutes before they're ready to roll. Good work, Sawadogo. Get clear of the area. Don't let them see you watching. Yes, sir. I hung up the phone and stood, my mind racing through scenarios and options. 20 men armed and organized coming for me tonight. They would expect me to be in my office or in my quarters, unaware and unprepared. They would plan for a quick arrest, minimal violence, a fait accompli that could be presented to the capital as a necessary transition of power. But I wasn't going to be where they expected me to be. I picked up my radio and keyed the secure channel. This is the captain. Alert status 3. I repeat, alert status 3. All designated personnel to rally points. Silent operations. Acknowledge. One by one, my loyalists checked in. 20 voices, quiet and professional, confirming they understood. Alert status 3. Our code for imminent threat, defensive positions, weapons ready but concealed. I turned off the lights in my office but left my desk lamp on, visible through the window. I wanted them to think I was still working, unsuspecting. Then I moved through the dark hallway to a storage room on the first floor that I had prepared 2 weeks earlier. Inside, I had positioned a field command post, radios, night vision equipment, extra ammunition, bottled water, and a direct view of the compound's main gate. I settled in to wait, my rifle across my lap, my radio in hand. Outside, the compound was quiet, most soldiers asleep or off duty. They had no idea that in less than an hour, this place would become a battlefield where careers would be destroyed and fates would be decided. I checked my watch. 11:17 p.m. If Sawadago was right, they would move around midnight. That gave me 43 minutes to finalize my preparations and position my people. I keyed the radio again. All units, they're coming from the motor pool. ETA approximately 40 minutes. Checkpoint 1, I want you to let them through without challenge. Make it look normal. Checkpoint 2, same protocol. I want them inside the wire before we act. Confirm. Checkpoint 1 confirms. Checkpoint 2 confirms. I smiled in the darkness. They thought they were hunters, but they were walking into a trap. And by sunrise, they would understand that the prey they had chosen was far more dangerous than they had imagined. At 2:17 a.m., I heard the first engines start. No headlights, just the low rumble of military trucks being fired up in the darkness. Through my night vision scope, I watched as 3 vehicles rolled out of the motor pool, moving slowly, trying to maintain stealth. I keyed my radio. All units, they're moving. Stay silent. Stay ready. The trucks approached checkpoint 1, where 2 of my soldiers stood guard. I held my breath, watching through the scope. Would my men follow orders? Would they let the conspirators through without raising an alarm? The lead truck slowed but didn't stop. One of my guards waved them through, barely looking up from his post. The truck accelerated, followed by the other 2 vehicles. Perfect. Good work. Checkpoint 1, I whispered into the radio. The convoy moved through the compound, heading toward the main administrative building where my office was located. As I'd predicted, they split into 2 groups. The first truck, carrying about 8 men, headed for the power station on the western edge of the compound. They were going to cut the electricity, throw us into darkness, create confusion. The other 2 trucks rolled toward the administrative building, carrying the remaining 12 officers. These were the arrest team, the ones who would climb the stairs to my office and take me into custody. I watched Lieutenant Ouedraogo climb out of the lead truck, assault rifle in hand. Even in the darkness, I could see the tension in his movements. This was a man who knew he was crossing a line from which there was no return. Major Sankara emerged from the second truck, along with Captain Zungrana and 9 other officers I recognized. All armed, all wearing full combat gear. This wasn't a political arrest. This was a military operation, planned and executed with precision. "They're at the building," I whispered into my radio. "Power station team, maintain surveillance. Main force, begin encirclement. Move quietly. No contact until my signal." Around the compound, my 20 loyalists began to move. They emerged from barracks, from guard posts, from positions I had assigned them earlier. They moved like shadows, taking up positions that would surround the administrative building in a complete circle. The conspirators were so focused on their target, me, that they didn't notice the trap closing around them. At the power station, 8 officers had entered the building. I heard the distinctive click of circuit breakers being thrown, and suddenly the compound went dark. Not just dark, black as pitch, with only starlight to see by. But I had cut the main power 30 minutes earlier, rerouting essential systems to backup generators that powered only critical security equipment and my command post. The conspirators thought they had created the darkness. They didn't realize I had been waiting in it all along. "This is it," I said into the radio. "Positions? West perimeter in position. East perimeter in position. North perimeter in position. South perimeter in position." Every approach to the administrative building was now covered. The conspirators were inside my killing zone, and they didn't even know it. Through my night vision scope, I watched Ouedraogo and 5 others enter the building. They moved in tactical formation, weapons up, clearing corners like they'd been trained. They were good soldiers. Under different circumstances, I would have been proud of their professionalism. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, moving toward my office. I could almost hear their breathing, feel their anticipation. This was the moment. The capture of their commanding officer, the symbolic act that would justify everything that came after. The first officer reached my office door. He tested the handle. It was unlocked. He pushed it open slowly, weapon raised, ready for resistance. Inside, my office was empty. The desk lamp still burned, casting shadows across papers and maps. My chair was pushed back slightly, as if I had just stepped away for a moment. On the desk, clearly visible in the lamplight, I had left a single piece of paper, 3 words, written in my own hand. "I expected you," through my scope. I watched the officer's body language change as he read those 3 words. He froze, his weapon lowered slightly. He turned to Ouedraogo, who had entered behind him, and pointed at the note. Even from my position, I could see the moment of realization dawn on Ouedraogo's face. He understood instantly what those words meant. This wasn't an arrest. This was a counter-operation, and they had walked right into it. "All units," I said calmly into my radio, "illuminate targets now." Around the compound, 20 flashlights and spotlights snapped on simultaneously, creating a perimeter of light that surrounded the administrative building. The conspirators, who had been operating in darkness, were suddenly exposed, caught in a circle of illumination that left no shadows to hide in. I keyed the loudspeaker system that I had secretly activated on backup power. My voice echoed across the compound, amplified and authoritative. "This is Captain. You are surrounded. Your plan has failed. Drop your weapons immediately. This is your only warning." For a moment, nothing happened. Inside the building, I could see Ouedraogo and his team moving to windows, looking out, realizing for the first time that they were trapped. Around the compound, the 8 officers at the power station emerged from the building, hands shielding their eyes from the sudden light, weapons raised but uncertain. "Drop your weapons," I repeated. Final warning, Major Sankara was the first to comply. I watched him through my scope as he slowly lowered his rifle, set it on the ground, and raised his hands. He was a pragmatist, a survivor. He understood when a game was lost. One by one, the others followed. Rifles clattered on concrete. Sidearms were placed on the ground. Hands raised in surrender. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes, and not a single shot was fired, except for one man. Captain Zungrana, standing near the second truck, didn't drop his weapon. Instead, he brought his rifle up, aiming toward the perimeter lights. It was a stupid, desperate gesture, the act of a man who couldn't accept defeat. "Zungrana, don't," I said into the loudspeaker. "It's over," he fired. A single shot that went wide, hitting nothing but dirt. Before he could fire again, 3 of my soldiers hit him with rifle butts, disarming him and forcing him to the ground. It was the only violence of the entire night, and it was over in seconds. I emerged from my command post, walking slowly across the compound toward the administrative building. My 20 loyalists maintained their positions, weapons still trained on the conspirators, but the tension was draining from the scene. The coup was over before it had really begun. Lieutenant Ouedraogo emerged from the building, hands raised, his face a mask of shame and defeat. When he saw me approaching, he couldn't meet my eyes. "Captain," he said quietly. "Save it," I said, cutting him off. "You made your choice. Now you live with the consequences." I looked around at the 20 officers who had come to arrest me. Some looked defiant. Others looked terrified. Most just looked exhausted, as if the adrenaline that had carried them through the night had suddenly drained away, leaving only the reality of what they had done. "You're all under arrest," I said calmly. "Conspiracy against commanding officer, unauthorized use of military resources, attempted coup. The charges will be filed in the morning. Until then, you'll be held in the stockade under guard." "What happens now?" Major Sankara asked. He was always the practical one, already thinking about next steps, about how to minimize damage. "Now?" I looked at him. "Now we wait for the sun to come up. And then we let the capital decide what happens to all of you." By 4:30 a.m., all 20 conspirators were secured in the stockade, a concrete building on the southern edge of the compound that we normally used for soldiers awaiting disciplinary hearings. My loyalists stood guard outside, rotating in shifts, making sure there would be no escape attempts and no rescue operations. I returned to my office, finally, and sat in the chair I had abandoned hours earlier. The note I had left, "I expected you," still lay on the desk. I picked it up and crumpled it, tossing it in the trash. Theater was useful in the moment, but now came the hard work of dealing with the aftermath. The first call I made was to General Traoré in the capital. He was the defense minister's chief of staff, the man who likely knew about the plot, possibly even authorized it. But I needed to control the narrative before anyone else did. "General," I said when he answered, his voice groggy with sleep, "this is Captain. I'm calling to inform you of an incident at the compound tonight." "What kind of incident?" His voice sharpened immediately. 20 officers attempted to arrest me without authorization. The attempt was unsuccessful. All conspirators are now in custody. I'll be filing formal charges at 0800 hours. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the calculations running through his mind. Should he deny knowledge? Express surprise? Try to take credit for exposing the plot? "How did you know?" he finally asked. "I'm a soldier, General. Reading the terrain and anticipating the enemy is what I do. These men weren't as subtle as they thought. What do you intend to do with them?" "That depends," I said carefully. "Some of them were misled. Others were true believers. I'll need to determine who falls into which category. The capital will want a full report. You'll have it by noon." "Captain," General Traoré said, his voice taking on a different tone, "you've placed yourself in a very difficult position. These men had supporters, people who believed change was necessary. Then those people were mistaken," I said flatly. "If they have concerns about my command, there are proper channels. What happened tonight wasn't proper channels. It was mutiny. Be careful," the general said. "You've won tonight's battle. But the war may not be over. I understand, sir. But I'm still here and I'm still in command." That sends a message, too. After hanging up with the general, I made a dozen more calls to other commanders, to intelligence contacts, to political allies in the capital who needed to hear the story from me before rumors started spreading. By the time the sun rose over Ouagadougou, painting the compound walls gold and orange. Everyone who mattered knew what had happened. The coup had failed, the captain was still in charge, and anyone who thought about trying again should think very carefully about the consequences. At 6 a.m., I called my senior staff together, the officers who hadn't been part of the conspiracy, the ones who were either loyal or at least smart enough to stay neutral. We met in the briefing room, a stark space with maps on the walls and uncomfortable chairs arranged in rows. "Last night," I said, standing at the front of the room, 20 officers attempted to remove me from command. They failed. Some of you may have known about this plot. If you did and stayed silent, you made a choice. I won't forget it, but I won't punish you for it either. What matters now is moving forward." I looked around the room, making eye contact with each officer. But let me be absolutely clear, this command is mine until the capital relieves me or I choose to step down. Anyone who thinks otherwise is welcome to try what Ouedraogo and his people tried. But I promise you, the result will be the same. No one spoke. The message had been received. Over the next 3 days, I conducted interrogations. Not brutal, not violent, I'm not that kind of officer, but thorough. I needed to understand who had planned this, who had financed it, and who had simply gone along because they were afraid or ambitious or stupid. What I learned was depressing but not surprising. The conspiracy had been organized by Lieutenant Ouedraogo and Major Sankara, with support from General Caboret in the capital. The money had come from a coalition of political interests who wanted a more pliable military command, officers who would look the other way during corruption, who would support the right candidates in the next election, who would play the game the way it had always been played in West Africa. But most of the 20 officers hadn't really understood what they were getting into. They had been told this was a routine leadership transition, that I was being removed for legitimate reasons, that the capital had authorized the operation. They had believed because they wanted to believe, because following orders was easier than asking questions. I made decisions based on what I learned. Lieutenant Ouedraogo and Major Sankara were dishonorably discharged and turned over to military prosecutors. Their careers were over, their reputations destroyed. They would likely face prison time. Captain Zongrana, who had fired the only shot of the night, was court-martialed and sentenced to 10 years military prison. His violence had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. 5 other officers who had been deeply involved in the planning received dishonorable discharges and were banned from military service for life. But the remaining 12, the followers, the uncertain ones, the men who had made a mistake but might still be salvaged, I treated differently. I transferred them to other commands, scattered them across Burkina Faso's military, with notes in their files that they had shown poor judgment but had potential for redemption. Some would rebuild their careers. Others would quietly fade away. But I gave them a chance because I remembered being young and uncertain, following orders I didn't fully understand. "You're being too soft," Sergeant Diabate told me one evening, as we stood on the roof of the administrative building, looking out over the compound. "These men betrayed you. They should all face consequences." "They are facing consequences," I said. "But you can't lead a country by fear alone. Not for long. These men made a mistake. Some of them might learn from it. And if they do, Burkina Faso gains experienced officers instead of embittered enemies. And if they don't learn, if they try again," I smiled grimly, "then next time I won't be so generous." 3 months after the night they came for me, I was called to the capital for a meeting with the defense minister. I expected it to be about the coup attempt, about my handling of the situation, maybe even about my future in the military. Instead, the defense minister, a shrewd politician who had survived 4 different presidents, congratulated me. "You handled that situation with remarkable skill," he said, sitting behind an enormous desk in an air-conditioned office that felt like luxury after months in the heat of Ouagadougou. "You could have created a bloodbath. Instead, you neutralized a threat without firing a shot. That's leadership. Thank you, Minister. General Caboret has been reassigned," the minister continued, his expression neutral. "His involvement in certain activities was deemed inappropriate. You'll be pleased to know that his replacement has no interest in removing effective commanders, so that was it. The people who had backed the coup had been outmaneuvered politically, and I was being rewarded for surviving. In West African military politics, success was its own justification. "I serve at the pleasure of the government," I said carefully. "Of course you do," the minister said with a slight smile. "But effective officers are rare. We intend to make sure you continue serving for a long time." I left the meeting understanding that I had been given a temporary reprieve. I had won this round, but the game never ended. There would always be another ambitious officer, another political faction, another crisis that could destroy everything I had built. But I also understood something else. I was still alive, still in command, and still standing. In a place like Burkina Faso, where most military careers ended in disgrace, exile, or worse, that was a victory worth celebrating. Now, looking back on that night, I understand it differently than I did while I was living through it. At the time, it felt like a personal betrayal, men I had trusted turning against me. But with distance, I can see it was never personal. It was simply the way power works in places where institutions are weak and personal loyalty is the only currency that matters. Lieutenant Ouedraogo didn't betray me because he hated me. He betrayed me because someone convinced him it was the smart move, the career-advancing move, the survivalist move. Major Sankara didn't plot against me out of malice, but out of ambition. And the 12 officers who followed them weren't evil. They were just soldiers following orders, even when those orders were wrong. The night they came for me taught me something fundamental about leadership. The biggest threat isn't always the enemy in front of you. Sometimes it's the ally standing beside you, smiling, waiting for the right moment to move. Trust is essential in the military. You can't function without it. But blind trust is suicidal. After that night, I changed how I led. I maintained relationships with my officers, but I also maintained distance. I built networks of loyal soldiers, but I never assumed loyalty was permanent. I prepared for betrayal even while hoping it would never come. Some might say that's no way to live, always looking over your shoulder, always expecting treachery. But in Burkina Faso, in West Africa, in any place where power is contested and violence is always an option, paranoia isn't a psychological disorder, it's survival instinct. I stayed in command of that compound for 2 more years after the attempted coup. In that time, there were 3 more plots against me that I detected and neutralized before they could develop. Each time I used the same tactics: intelligence gathering, careful positioning of loyalists, and the willingness to act decisively when action was required. Eventually, I was promoted and transferred to a position in the capital, where the threats were more political than military, but no less dangerous. I served there for 5 years before finally retiring, leaving the army with my reputation intact and my life preserved. No small achievement in the military, where so many of my contemporaries had ended their careers in disgrace, or prison or graves. They say that survival changes you, that going through something like that night leaves marks you can't erase. They're right. I'm not the same man I was before 20 officers came to arrest me in the darkness. I'm harder now, less trusting, more calculating. I look at every relationship through the lens of potential betrayal. I plan for scenarios I hope will never happen. I maintain escape routes and contingency plans even in my retirement, because the habits of survival don't fade just because you're no longer in uniform. But I'm also still alive. I'm still free. And I still have my honor, which matters more than people might think. In a world where so many soldiers compromise their principles for power or money or survival, I managed to keep mine mostly intact. Lieutenant Ouedraogo served 7 years in military prison before being released. I heard he moved to Côte d'Ivoire and works in private security now. We've never spoken since that night. Major Sankara died 3 years after the coup attempt, killed in a traffic accident that may or may not have been arranged by people he had betrayed or who felt betrayed by him. The circumstances were never fully investigated. Sergeant Diabate, the man who warned me and helped me survive, continued serving loyally until his retirement. I made sure he was promoted, protected, and rewarded. Loyalty deserves loyalty. And the compound in Ouagadougou, it's still there, still housing soldiers, still witnessing the endless cycles of ambition and betrayal that define military life in West Africa. Sometimes I wonder if anyone there remembers what happened that night. or if it's just another forgotten incident in a place that has seen so many. But I remember every detail. The weight of the rifle in my hands, the sound of engines in the darkness. The moment when Lieutenant Ouedraogo read my note and understood he had been outmaneuvered. The silence when weapons hit the ground in surrender. I remember because that night defined me. It showed me what I was capable of, both the courage to face betrayal and the discipline to respond without unnecessary violence. It taught me that leadership isn't about being liked or trusted or even respected. It's about being prepared, being aware, and being willing to do what's necessary when the moment comes. They came for me at night. 20 men, armed, organized, confident. They thought they were the hunters, and I was the prey, but they were wrong. And that's why I'm still here, sitting in a comfortable chair, drinking coffee in the morning sun, writing down this story so maybe someone else can learn from it. So maybe another young officer facing betrayal will remember that survival isn't about strength or firepower. It's about preparation, awareness, and the willingness to trust your instincts even when everyone around you seems trustworthy. The night they came for me was the most dangerous night of my life. But it was also the night that proved everything I believed about leadership, survival, and the brutal reality of power in places where the rules are written in sand and washed away with every coup and counter-coup. I survived because I was ready. Because I paid attention. Because I understood that in this world, the price of complacency is everything you've built, everything you are, everything you hope to become. They came for me at night, but I was waiting, and that's why I'm still here to tell the story. What people don't understand about military coups is that they're rarely spontaneous. They're carefully orchestrated performances where everyone plays a role they've rehearsed in their minds 100 times before the actual moment arrives. The 20 officers who came for me that night had been preparing psychologically for weeks, convincing themselves that what they were about to do was necessary, justified, even patriotic. I know this because after the coup failed, during the interrogations, I asked them all the same question. When did you decide I needed to be removed? The answers were illuminating. For some, it was a gradual process, a series of small doubts that accumulated over months until they became certainty. They would point to decisions I had made that they disagreed with, policies they thought were wrong, alliances they believed were dangerous. In their minds, they had built a narrative where I was the problem and my removal was the solution. For others, the decision came suddenly, triggered by a single conversation with Ouedraogo or Sankara. These were the followers, the men who could be swayed by a compelling argument delivered at the right moment. They weren't natural conspirators. They were soldiers who valued loyalty and obedience. And when someone they respected told them that loyalty to the institution meant removing a compromised commander, they believed it. And then there were the opportunists, the ones who saw the coup as a career opportunity. They didn't care whether I was good or bad at my job. They cared that my removal would create openings for promotion, access to resources, favor with whoever came next. These were the most dangerous conspirators because their motivations were purely transactional, which meant they could never be truly trusted, even by their fellow plotters. Understanding these psychological profiles helped me make decisions about punishment and mercy. The idealists who genuinely believed they were doing the right thing, I gave them chances to redeem themselves. The followers who had been manipulated, I transferred them but didn't destroy their careers. The opportunists, those I removed from the military entirely because men who betray for advancement will always betray again when the opportunity arises. People often ask me how I knew the coup was coming. The simple answer is, I paid attention. But the real answer is more complex and more instructive for anyone trying to survive in a dangerous political environment. Intelligence. Gathering in a military context isn't like the spy movies where you have sophisticated surveillance equipment and elaborate networks of informants. It's much more mundane and much more human. It's about noticing when someone's behavior changes. It's about tracking who talks to whom. It's about understanding that information flows through organizations in predictable patterns, and when those patterns change, it means something is happening. I had 3 key sources of intelligence that saved my life. First, Sergeant Diabate. He wasn't a professional spy or a trained intelligence operative. He was simply a loyal NCO who kept his eyes and ears open because I had once saved his life, and he felt he owed me. The debt of honor in African military culture is profound. It creates bonds that can last a lifetime. Diabate heard things in the NCO quarters, in the mess hall, in the motor pool, places where officers thought their conversations were private, but where enlisted men were always listening. Second, the compound grapevine. Every military base has an informal information network where rumors, gossip, and facts mix together in a constant flow of communication. Most commanders ignore this network or try to suppress it. I cultivated it. I made sure I had at least 5 soldiers scattered throughout the compound who would quietly pass information to me through intermediaries. They didn't do this for money or advancement. They did it because I had treated them fairly, protected them when they made mistakes, and earned their personal loyalty through small acts of decency that most officers overlooked. Third, financial intelligence. I had a contact in the banking sector in Ouagadougou, a civilian who owed me a favor from years earlier. When I suspected something was wrong, I asked him to quietly monitor financial transactions involving my senior officers. The 5 million CFA franc transfer to Captain. Zungrana was the smoking gun that told me this wasn't just talk. It was a funded operation with external backing. These 3 intelligence streams converged to give me a clear picture of what was coming. Without any one of them, I might have been caught unprepared. With all 3, I had enough advance warning to turn the hunters into the hunted. Let me walk you through that night in more granular detail, because the timing and sequencing of events was crucial to the outcome. 4:45 p.m. I'm in my office reviewing supply requisitions. The compound is quiet, normal. I have no idea that in the motor pool, Lieutenant Ouedraogo is gathering his team for a final briefing. 3:03 p.m. The secure phone rings. Corporal Sawadogo delivers the warning. My heart rate spikes, but I force myself to remain calm. This is the moment I've been preparing for, even though part of me hoped it would never come. 7 p.m. I activate Alert Status 3, bringing my 20 loyalists to readiness. I deliberately keep the alert vague. I don't tell them exactly what's happening yet because I need them focused and calm, not panicked or trigger-happy. 11:15 p.m. I move from my office to the storage room command post. As I walk through the dark hallway, I pass 2 soldiers who have no idea what's about to happen. I nod to them normally as if this is just another late night of paperwork. Maintaining normalcy is crucial. If word gets back to the conspirators that I'm acting strangely, they might abort or change their plan. 30 p.m. I cut the main power to the compound, routing essential systems through backup generators that only I and my chief engineer know about. This is a gamble. If the conspirators notice the power is already compromised, they might realize I'm aware of their plan. But I need the darkness to work for me, not against me. By 5 p.m. From my command post, I watch through night vision as my loyalists move into position. They're professionals, moving silently, using hand signals, creating a perimeter that will be invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. I feel a surge of pride in these men, even as I acknowledge that their lives are about to be at risk because of decisions I've made. 18 a.m. Nothing happens. I start to wonder if Sawadogo's intelligence was wrong, if the conspirators have delayed or aborted. Doubt creeps in, the most dangerous emotion in a crisis. I force it down, reminding myself that coups rarely happen on schedule. Human nervousness and second-guessing always introduce delays. Still nothing. My legs are cramping from sitting in the cramped command post. I consider standing, stretching, but I don't want to create any movement that might be visible. So I sit, uncomfortable, waiting, trusting that my intelligence was accurate. 17 a.m. The engines start. Relief washes over me, not because I'm happy about what's coming, but because the uncertainty is over. Now it's just execution. I key the radio and begin orchestrating the response. 23 a.m. The conspirators pass checkpoint 1. I watch through my scope as my guard waves them through without challenge. Perfect. I whisper encouragement into the radio to the checkpoint team. knowing they must be terrified, wondering if they're making a mistake by letting armed officers pass without raising an alarm. AM. The conspirators split up, exactly as I predicted. Human behavior in military operations is surprisingly predictable if you understand doctrine and training. They're following the standard playbook for facility seizure: secure power, secure command. Textbook, which makes it exploitable. 34 AM. The lights go out. The conspirators think they've cut the power. They don't know I did it an hour earlier. This psychological advantage, letting them think they're in control, is crucial to what comes next. 8 AM. Ouedraogo enters the building. I watch him move up the stairs, weapon ready, every movement showing professional military training. In another context, I would be proud of how well I taught him. Now I'm just sad that it's come to this. 41 AM. They find the note. Through my night vision scope, I see Ouedraogo freeze. That moment of realization that the prey knew the hunters were coming is when the coup truly fails. Everything after is just cleanup. 42 AM, I give the signal. Lights blaze. My voice echoes across the compound. The psychological impact is devastating. Sudden light after darkness. The voice of the man they thought they were hunting. The realization that they're surrounded. Some of the conspirators literally stumble, disoriented by the sudden reversal. AM, weapons start hitting the ground. Major Sankara is first, pragmatic to the end. Others follow. The sound of surrender, metal on concrete, is one I'll never forget. AM. Captain Zungrana fires his shot. It's a moment of pure stupidity, driven by panic and wounded pride. My soldiers respond with admirable restraint. They disarm him without shooting him, which takes discipline in a high-stress situation. AM. It's over. 20 men are in custody. The compound is secure. I've survived. The relief is overwhelming, but I don't let it show. Leaders can't show relief. It suggests they were worried, which suggests they weren't in control. 15 AM. The conspirators are being processed into the stockade. I watch from a distance as they're searched, their weapons confiscated, their gear stripped away. They look smaller now, less threatening. Without their weapons and their confidence, they're just scared men facing uncertain futures. 30 AM. Everyone is secured. I finally allow myself to feel tired. The adrenaline crash hits hard. My hands shake slightly. My legs feel weak. I sit in my office, in the chair I abandoned hours ago, and allow myself 5 minutes of vulnerability before I have to become the commander again. What I haven't fully explained is the political complexity that followed the failed coup. In the days and weeks after, I had to navigate a minefield of competing interests, all of whom had different interpretations of what had happened and different ideas about what should happen next. The Defense Ministry wanted the incident handled quietly. A public court-martial would raise questions about military discipline, about how 20 officers could plot a coup without anyone in the capital knowing. It would embarrass the government and potentially inspire copycat attempts. So there was pressure to resolve things internally with minimal publicity. The French, who still maintained significant influence in Burkina Faso's military affairs, wanted assurances that the incident wouldn't destabilize the country or threaten their strategic interests. I had several meetings with French military advisors who asked pointed questions about my loyalty, my intentions, and whether I had any ambitions beyond my current command. The subtext was clear. They were trying to determine if I was the kind of officer who might launch my own coup. The political opposition saw the failed coup as evidence of military dysfunction and tried to use it to argue for civilian control reforms. There were calls for investigations, for parliamentary inquiries, for transparency about what had happened and why. These calls were ignored by the government. But they added another layer of pressure to an already complex situation, and within the military itself, there were debates about what the coup attempt meant for discipline, command structure, and the delicate balance of tribal and regional loyalties that kept the armed forces from fracturing. Some senior generals saw my survival as a sign of strength and leadership. Others saw it as evidence that I was too polarizing, too independent, potentially dangerous to the established order. I navigated all of this by being simultaneously firm and flexible, firm about my authority and my right to command, flexible about how I punished the conspirators and how I framed the incident publicly. I gave everyone a version of the story they could live with. To the Defense Ministry, this was a minor disciplinary matter, handled internally, no threat to national security. To the French, I was a stable, reliable officer with no political ambitions, focused solely on professional military duties. To the opposition, I couldn't comment on political matters, but I supported civilian control of the military and would follow whatever directives came from legitimate government authority. To the military, I was a strong commander who had dealt decisively with betrayal while showing appropriate mercy to those who deserved it. Each audience heard what they needed to hear, and somehow I managed to emerge from the crisis with my position intact and even slightly strengthened. But it was exhausting, and it taught me that surviving. The coup attempt itself was only half the battle. Surviving the political aftermath was equally challenging. What gets lost in stories like this is the human cost of betrayal and survival. Yes, I survived. Yes, I maintained my command. Yes, justice was served in some fashion. But people's lives were destroyed that night, and not just the obvious ones. Lieutenant Ouedraogo's family, his wife and 3 children, were stigmatized after his disgrace. His wife had to move back to her village, where she faced questions and judgment about what her husband had done. His children grew up with the knowledge that their father was a traitor, a failed coup plotter, a man who had dishonored his uniform and his family. Major Sankara's elderly mother died 6 months after he was imprisoned, and he wasn't allowed to attend her funeral. That's a burden he'll carry forever. The knowledge that his ambition cost him the chance to say goodbye to the woman who raised him. Captain Zungrana served his 10-year sentence, but his life was effectively over. No job prospects, no respect, no community willing to accept him back. Last I heard, he was working as a security guard at a warehouse, a job that requires no trust and offers no future. And what about the 12 officers I gave second chances? Some rebuilt their careers, yes, but they all carry the knowledge that they participated in a coup attempt, that they betrayed their commander, that they made a choice that could have resulted in bloodshed. That knowledge changes you. It makes you doubt yourself, question your judgment, wonder if you're capable of making the same mistake again. Even my loyal soldiers, the 20 men who stood with me that night, paid a price. They became marked as the captain's men, which helped them while I was in command but could have hurt them if I had fallen. They tied their fates to mine, and that's a burden I take seriously. And me? I survived, but I lost something that night too. I lost the ability to trust easily. I lost the comfort of believing that the men I led actually wanted to follow me. I gained a level of paranoia that has served me well professionally, but has made my personal life more difficult. I have trouble forming close relationships because I'm always looking for the betrayal, always calculating whether people are loyal or just waiting for their moment. My wife, I haven't mentioned her much, but she lived through this too, told me years later that I came home different after that night. You were always a serious man, she said, but after that you became a hard man. The warmth left your eyes. She was right. Part of me died that night, the part that believed in the fundamental goodness of people, the part that assumed loyalty was natural rather than transactional. If you're reading this and you're in a position of leadership, military, corporate, political, whatever, let me share the lessons I learned that might save your career or your life. Lesson 1. Trust, but verify. Never assume loyalty. People's motivations are complex, and circumstances can turn friends into enemies overnight. Build systems that allow you to monitor what's happening around you without being overtly suspicious. Lesson 2. Invest in relationships below you. My survival depended on loyal NCOs and enlisted soldiers, not on other officers. The people at the bottom of the hierarchy often have better intelligence than the people at the top because they're invisible, underestimated, and everywhere. Lesson 3. Don't ignore warning signs. I almost dismissed the early indicators that something was wrong because I didn't want to believe betrayal was possible. If your instincts tell you something's off, investigate immediately. Lesson 4. Prepare for crises before they arrive. I survived because I had spent weeks preparing for a coup attempt before it happened. If I had waited until the night they came to start preparing, I would have been arrested or killed. Lesson 5. Control the narrative. After surviving the coup, I immediately controlled how the story was told. I called the defense minister, I briefed key stakeholders, I shaped the narrative before anyone else could. In politics and military affairs, the first version of events often becomes the accepted version. Lesson 6. Balance justice with mercy. I could have destroyed all 20 conspirators, but that would have created 20 families with nothing left to lose and every reason to seek revenge. By showing selective mercy, I diffused potential future threats. Lesson 7. Never show fear. Even when I was terrified that night, I maintained calm. Leaders can't afford to show panic because panic spreads. Your demeanor sets the tone for everyone around you. Lesson 8. Know when to be ruthless. Mercy is valuable, but it must be balanced with firmness. The truly dangerous conspirators, Ouedraogo, Sankara, Zaungrana, had to be dealt with harshly to send a message that betrayal has consequences. I'm writing this now from a small house outside Ouagadougou, where I've lived since retiring from the military 6 years ago. I have a garden, some chickens, a dog that barks at nothing in particular. It's a quiet life, far removed from the tension and danger of my military career. Sometimes former soldiers visit me, young officers seeking advice, old comrades wanting to reminisce, journalists hoping to get me to talk about things I've promised to never discuss publicly. I'm polite but guarded. Some habits you never break. People ask me if I regret how I handled that night. Would I do anything differently? The honest answer is I don't know. I made the best decisions I could with the information I had, under circumstances no one should have to face. Did I make mistakes? Probably. Was I too harsh on some people and too lenient on others? Maybe. But I survived, and my country didn't descend into violence, and that has to count for something. I think often about Lieutenant Ouedraogo. We were friends once, or at least I thought we were. What makes a man betray a friend? Ambition? Fear? Ideology? I've never gotten a satisfactory answer to that question, despite years of thinking about it. Sometimes I dream about that night. In the dreams, things go differently. Sometimes the conspirators succeed, and I wake up in a cold sweat, feeling the phantom sensation of handcuffs on my wrists. Sometimes there's violence, gunfire, blood, outcomes that almost happened but didn't, and sometimes, in the strangest dreams, I refuse to fight back. I let them arrest me, curious to see what would have happened if I had chosen surrender instead of resistance. But these are just dreams. Reality is what it is. I survived because I was prepared, aware, and willing to do what was necessary. That's the truth, unglamorous and complicated as it is. The night 20 Burkina Faso army officers tried to arrest me was not the most important night of my life, but it was the most defining. It crystallized everything I believed about leadership, loyalty, and survival into a single test that I somehow passed. If there's a moral to this story, it's this: in dangerous times, complacency kills. Whether you're a military officer in West Africa, a business executive in a competitive industry, or just someone trying to navigate complicated relationships, the same principle applies. Pay attention, prepare for the worst, and never assume that today's ally won't become tomorrow's enemy. But there's another truth, too, one that's harder to articulate. Surviving isn't the same as winning. I kept my command, my career, my life, but I lost friendships, peace of mind, and a certain innocence about human nature. The cost of survival is measured not just in what you keep, but in what you lose along the way. They came for me at night, 20 men with guns and ambitions. I was ready. I survived. And now I live with what that survival required, both the actions I took and the person I became in order to take them. That's my story. That's my truth. And that's why, even in retirement, I still sometimes wake at 2:17 in the morning, listening for engines in the darkness, wondering if tonight is the night someone tries again. But the compound is quiet now. The wars are over, at least for me, and in the morning, I'll tend my garden, feed my chickens, and live another day in the peace I fought so hard to secure. That has to be enough. The end.